Well, new migration data shows a record number of people are leaving New Zealand and most are choosing to move to Australia. It's prompted fears of a brain drain as workers look for opportunities they say aren't available at home. So why are things looking greener elsewhere for New Zealanders? It's a question I put to Professor Paul Spoonley, a sociologist at Massey University in Auckland.
Well, it's largely economic, and so there's always push and pull factors. The push factors out of New Zealand are the very soft labour market and the fact that the government is reducing the size of the civil service. So there's a lot of public service jobs gone. And of course, the other side of that is that the Australian economy wants workers, and you've got a number of sectors and a number of employers who are on this side of the Tasman busily recruiting. And so you can get a higher salary in Australia. There are other elements to the attractiveness of Australia, the sun, the sea. And so we've seen this spike in people leaving New Zealand, 70,000 in the last 12 months, and 60% of them going to Australia.
And do we know which industries are attracting New Zealanders to Australia?
No, it's right across the sector. Yeah. So it might be a truck driver in a mine in Perth, all the way through to some of the sectors that have been recruiting. So healthcare has been actively recruiting here. Police, Northern Territories and Queensland Police have been actively recruiting here. And so we've got employers, but also recruiters this side of the Tasman busily picking up, people who are willing to go. And of course, the other thing is there's a lot of people leaving who've already got friends and family in Australia and are hearing positive stories there about getting employment, living the good life in Sydney or Brisbane. And so there's an attractiveness that's always been there, but it's heightened at the moment.
Yeah, so and is there a sense that many who do leave for work do so on a permanent basis, as suggested by some politicians, but others say they may return at some stage?
Net loss is roughly between 45 and 50,000, depending upon which month. And then 70,000 are leaving. So you can see that there's a return of about 30,000 people coming back to New Zealand. So some of it is temporary, but the other element is permanent. And what we're seeing in Australia, particularly with the agreement between Albanese and Ardern a few years ago, that New Zealanders would be treated differently. There was a Howard government decision back in 2001, which actually made it very difficult for New Zealanders to get access to certain rights, including, unemployment or study rights in Australia. And that's all evaporated. So the size of the New Zealand community in Australia is large, probably closing in on 700,000, and it's growing larger. So I always talk about the centre of gravity, and in some cases, particularly for certain families, the centre of gravity is very much on the other side of the Tasman. So once members of the family get established there, they then attract others across to join them.
Yes, and Professor Spoonley, you spoke earlier about the cuts to the civil service. That's where a lot of employment loss is. But does New Zealand have a general employment problem and that's led by its economic situation? What's happening there? Give us a sense of what the overall situation is that is leading to this employment issue.
Yes, well, the figures have been going up. So unemployment is now at 5.3%. And the other figure, which is really important, is the level of underemployment, which is that people have got qualifications and experience and they're not being utilised in their current employment. So they're looking for further work. And there's a very interesting question that I don't know the answer to, but if we've got this 5.3% unemployment in New Zealand, what would it be if all those people aren't going to Australia and they stayed here? And my suspicion is that the real unemployment, if you took that into account, would be much higher. So in a sense, we're possibly exporting some of our unemployment across the Tasman.
Yes, but even while New Zealand might be exporting the unemployment, but then there's also net migration coming in because the official figures are showing that there are many who are coming from countries like China, India and the Philippines. Is that helping in any way to mitigate the brain drain?
Yes, and I actually don't talk about the brain drain. Yeah. I talk about brain exchange. And so particularly if you take a sector like healthcare, we're seeing a lot of our new graduates out of our medical schools up sticks and moving to other countries, particularly to Australia. And so then we recruit healthcare professionals from around the world, from South Africa, UK, from China, from India, to replace the loss that we're seeing there. So overall, New Zealand is still in positive territory. There are more people coming than leaving. However, I think it's still a major policy and political issue that so many are leaving, and that we need to backfill the gaps that they're leaving behind.
So in that respect, is the government looking into this and responding in any way to create better job prospects for New Zealanders that would keep citizens from going overseas to work, particularly to Australia?
Yeah, not really. I don't understand why this is not a major political policy issue for the government, that they're looking to say, well, how can we retain people? When we look at the people who are leaving, they're typically in their 20s. They're quite often new graduates. So they're skilled people that we really do need in this country. And unfortunately, we've got a series of strikes. We're seeing teachers and healthcare professionals on strike, trying to get better conditions, better pay from the government. And the government are resisting at this point. So I'm not sure there's a lot of urgency, and I'm not sure that the government are prepared to do much, really, to try and retain people in this country in the way that I think they should be.
Yes, and finally, just going back to net migration coming in, might this or has this led to the sorts of anti-immigration sentiments we are seeing in Europe and the US?
No. And like Australia and Canada, we operate a point system. 2/3 of the people that come to New Zealand and are approved for permanent residence come into the skilled migrant category. So they're typically middle-class professionals, highly skilled, highly educated. And so we do not see the level of anti-immigrant hostility and politics. That's not to say that we don't have some. And certainly New Zealand First has been talking an anti-immigrant line. They're a coalition partner in the current government, has been talking an anti-immigrant line quite recently. And I suspect they're going to make that a key policy platform going into the next election. But if we look at public opinion polling, then no, essentially around 2/3 of New Zealanders, as they do in Australia, see migration and migrants as being a positive good for the country.
Okay, Professor Paul Spoonley, really good to hear your insights and expertise into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.